with you, Sarah. Then I think we'll go to Nestle, if that's okay.
Yep.
You wanted to go last, Gunhild?
Thank you.
Testing the mic.
1, 2, 1, 2. 2, 3, 2, 3. Thank you and good night.
4, 5, 4, 5.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the GEF Pavilion here at Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. Today, on Food Systems and Agriculture Day, we're discussing this concept of food systems and how food systems can be transformative towards a nature-positive and net zero world. My name is Matthew Reddy. I'm the Senior Private Sector Specialist with the Global Environment Facility, and we have a terrific panel joining us today. If I may first introduce the panel, we have Owen Bethnal, who is the Environmental Impact Lead, Global Public Affairs and ESG Engagement with Nestle. We have Dr. Gunhild Stordalen, who is the founder and the president of the EAT Foundation, of course, most famous for the EAT Lancet report. We have Matthew Warnken joining us from Corporate Carbon, where he is the chair and the MD of AgriProve and is the largest soil carbon project developer at the national compliance level in the world. And we're joined also by Sara Farley, who is the Director of Food Systems at the Rockefeller Foundation. And I think when we consider COPs, when we consider the UNFCCC, I think there's this strong growth in interest around food systems. I think it's going to reach a crescendo. It's very high on the agenda, but I think it's going to really start to be a dominant factor in the agenda as a complex issue, because we all know sustainable food systems are essential for our health, food security and nutrition, and the economic of well-being around the world. But right now, I'm sure this situation isn't going to be resolved anytime soon. The challenges of rising energy costs, rising input costs, elevated levels of food insecurity, and changes in consumption pattern towards higher protein diets are already straining our fragile and broken food systems. Without the transformation towards sustainable food systems, climate change adaptation and mitigation goals of the UNFCCC cannot be met. So we must have decisive action towards sustainability under the transformative agenda for food systems, and we must have the pathways to redefine how we produce and consume, and to ensure that such pathways are underpinned by objectives for equity and food security. To accelerate the transformation, we need new business models, we need innovative finance, we need strong science-based, evidence-based backing, and we can only do that to achieve a nature-positive, climate-smart, meaning regenerative future. And these are the themes that we'll be discussing today on our panel. So I'd like to start first of all by asking Sara Farley, who is the Director of Food Systems at the Rockefeller Foundation, our first question for the panel. And each panelist will ask similar questions, and they bring a different perspective from the food systems to each of these answers. And I'd like to ask you, Sara, when we consider these pressures of food insecurity, energy prices, which are top of the agenda right now here at COP. How are they considered? And how are these being factored in to your programs, and especially considering implementation and moving to scale? Thank you.
Well, for the Rockefeller Foundation, I think we really believe we would separate the nutrition security crisis and the climate crisis at our peril. We can only look at them as joined up. We launched a year ago our Good Food Strategy, which is pursuing a nourishing, regenerative, and equitable food system. And the reason we did that is we're out of time for or. We can't optimize only for nutrition or only for environment or only for human rights, justice, and equity. That defines how we pursued these goals for the last many decades. It is time for a united approach, a systems approach. And we know that further in terms of attainment of the Paris goals. If we want the 7.8 gigatons of carbon sequestration out of land conversion, that's one piece of the puzzle, but so too is the 1.8 gigatons per year from healthy and sustainable diets and reductions in food loss and waste. All of this can feel incredibly complex and overwhelming until you take a food systems approach and realize the interconnections between those two. So what does it look like for us? Right now, we're really thinking about four things in terms of how we get there. One is doubling down on regenerative production practices. What does that mean? That's part of the trouble. Companies, farmers, indigenous communities define this term differently. And so we're putting investment and our collaboration capabilities around creating a space where we can really understand both the outcomes that we're pursuing from carbon, soil health, biodiversity, cultural, and even spiritual practices. How do we put that in one frame? So regenerative is one way to get there. The second, from a policy level, we need to make healthy and sustainable diets the simple choice, the easy choice, not the uphill climb that it so often is for country governments, let alone for consumers. The third, we need to build a pathway into these decisions and these policies and these optimizations of the NDCs via data. And I think we're going to hear some amazing points about that from the fellow panelists. And the fourth, if we're really struggling with how do we understand our food security crisis amidst the climate, energy, and finance crises, I think, I was putting it this way, if humanity were to have a bumper sticker right now, I think the bumper sticker reads, collaborate or perish. We have to be so much more radically inclusive of who's at the table, who's defining these pathways, these transition pathways. That means indigenous people, that means youth, that means civil society, that means farmers, it means the 2.5 billion smallholder farmers and their dependents that are really at the heart of our food system. Until we bring that community together, not just to sit at the table, but to define what we eat and how we transform the conversation at the table, we're not going to get there.
Thank you, Sarah, for that holistic view of where we need to be going, linking demand and production. And I think it's a good time now to turn to Owen Bethnal with Nestle, because Nestle is really at the interface of facing those consumers and facing the supply constraints and the challenges of supply. And I wonder, Owen, if you might share some lights on how Nestle is dealing with these challenges of food systems.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Matt, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to start about 3.5 years ago, where we made our net zero commitment internally, and then started working on the external piece around what should that mean. And the starting point was looking at our scope 1, 2, and 3, and immediately realizing, of course, that 95%-ish of all emissions are coming from the supply chain, and around 2/3 of that is coming from food production. So to get to net zero, there's no other way than to address the way in which that food is being produced and to shift to a more regenerative system. And I think as we started on that journey, we soon realized that we needed to increase the number of focus areas. So it wasn't just about carbon, that's the initial kind of number, but then we start to think about biodiversity, we start to think about water, we start to think about diets as well, and what is it we're selling, and how could that shift over time as well to, all serve into that net zero journey that we're on. And so then if we fast forward to about 1 year ago, we then launched an ambition to advance regenerative food systems at scale. So again, that's kind of not just about carbon, that's going much beyond it to think about agricultural production, to think about the way we measure the impact of those different systems, how we engage with communities, how we address human rights issues, how we address farmer income, and how we think about the engagement on the consumer side as well. So really a kind of like holistic end-to-end approach which developed over time, and I think we continue to learn and evolve as we go forward. So one of the main reasons for being here at COP is to advocate for food systems at scale, regenerative food systems at scale, for that to be a big part of the conversation on climate. You know, everybody here will know the statistics about the impact on fresh water, on biodiversity, on carbon of food systems, and so, you know, achieving net zero, avoiding the worst case scenarios, delivering a more equitable economy, all rely on the integration of food systems into policy making and into corporate ambition. And from our company perspective, we have an ambition to reach 50% regeneratively grown ingredients, key ingredients by the end of this decade, by 2030, actually 20% by 2025, which is very soon. And we already have hundreds, if not thousands, of projects underway around the world to achieve that. We're sourcing 40,000 tons of regeneratively grown cereals from the north of France already. We've got regenerative dairy farming underway in South Africa. We're improving the way cocoa is being produced in West Africa, which also has a positive impact on farmer income and therefore associated social benefits. So, you know, we're not waiting for the full alignment, which may be coming and may be necessary. We're moving already, and we need to, you know, we need to get moving to keep emissions coming down and to deliver those other benefits in the shortest possible time frame. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen, and I think these shorter term gated targets, you know, 2025 targets, 2030 targets, rather than the bigger targets, are a very realistic way of dealing with the food systems challenge. And I think, you know, the GEF, of course, working with Nestle in a number of capacities, certainly through our adaptation program, and of course through the Forest Initiative, of which Nestle is a key partner. Matthew, we're looking now at Matthew Warnken, MD of AgriProof. Matthew, we're really looking now at different ways of financing the transition. We can't rely on the companies, it's not up to the banks, but there are new and innovative ways that we can become more, less carbon intensive and more nature positive. Can you tell us about what you're doing?
Sure, thanks Matthew. Good morning everyone. So I run a company called AgriProof, and our mission is to commercialize soils as a climate solution. I entered the space not from an agricultural background, but through looking at the lens as to, well, where do we get large-scale abatement? And what was compelling about soils is just the foundational nature of soils and the ability to decarbonize agriculture by taking carbon out of the atmosphere, where it's a problem, and putting it into a soil where it's a fundamental asset for farmers. So for us, when we look at the prospect of soils and the prospect of transforming agriculture, starting with soils, we see no downside. We're not taking land out of production, we're looking at enhancing production. And in fact, it's more than just a carbon story, it's a water story. It's an infiltration, water holding. It's a nutrient story in terms of more, plant available nutrition to grow, and ultimately it becomes a that transformative power is that win-win-win going beyond soils to actually landscapes. And we were talking before about the panel where soils is essentially a subset of the overall landscape, the overall biodiversity. And what's fascinating for us is looking at the new emerging science around the soil biome, the microbial fungi population, and the health of that biome as being, again, foundational to a safe climate, foundational to feeding a growing population, foundational to good nutrition. So we very much came in at looking at that way. We're an Australian-based company. For those who know Australia, we've got a lot of land. It's not in the best of conditions, so we just saw a huge opportunity. And so that then said about, well, what is the funding model to get to scale in terms of transforming agriculture? And there, Australia has a regulatory program where we can get carbon credits that do count to our Paris targets from measured increases in soil carbon. So then that, in a way, provided a pathway carbon being a proxy for ecosystem services to de-risk the market side. So you're going to change and move to regenerative practices. And I love the term regenerative agriculture because I think strategically and holistically it puts regenerative to agriculture the same way that renewables disrupted energy. So renewables to energy, regen to agriculture, and you could see how regen targets from a policy and a funding perspective starts to make sense. So we can get a credit if we measure an increase in soil carbon, and because it's a measurement-based approach, we're focused on the evidence and the science of soil sampling. So AgriProve, as a private company, is soon going to be the largest holder of soil data across the widest varieties of farming systems, climate types, and soil types than the peer-reviewed literature. So there's going to be an interesting crossover where now these emerging practices, these innovative regenerative practices, coupled with world's best practice soil sampling, is going to define the science. So we're not going to have these academic debates about stale science which say you can't build carbon in soils. It's almost like a debate that's saying you can't do electric vehicles because there's a peer-reviewed paper from 2005 that says the battery range doesn't work. But then the cars are just running up and down. We've got farmers actually doing it in Australia. But the evidence is really important, and I'm not meant to decry that soil science. It's really important, and we're building that evidence base. That evidence base allows us to get the funding, and that evidence base then allows us to get to scale. But the other problem that we're grappling with is the scaling on the measurement front, and there it's really about digitizing soils. Digitizing soils so that they can feed into digital twins of farms, so that it can actually de-link and provide better decision-making customized to individual farm, and also provide greater confidence in terms of monetizing soil carbon benefits. But if you're doing soil carbon, then we're also looking at monetizing the clean water benefits, and we hope to have a draft reef credit water quality method out for discussion early next year. It's effectively a water quality a method, and then that puts us on a platform to then ultimately look at trying to credit the biodiversity benefits and the soil health benefits and the benefits from actually taking nitrogen out of the atmosphere into the soil, as opposed to applying synthetic sources of nutrition. So that flywheel, digitizing that flywheel, allows us a pathway to get to scale. So that's what we're sort of grappling with at the moment, is our own internal digital transformation.
And Matthew, just give us some price indication, a top and a bottom of the market in Australia, because I think people need to understand this is, quite substantial revenue coming through now.
Sure. So at the moment, the spot price in Australia is around $35 Australian per tonne of carbon dioxide. It's been up to 50, but when we did our modelling on the business case for soils, we were doing it at a $10 price, because it's not the prime driver for changing practices. It's a co-payment for the improvements on the farm. And importantly, in the context of farm operations, it's a payment directly onto the bottom line. So it's beyond normal farm gate revenue. So it's pure profit. So if your farm's operating at a 5% margin, a $10 carbon credit per hectare is the equivalent, it's going to test my mental arithmetic on a Saturday morning, but that's the equivalent of $200 per hectare of farm gate revenue. And that would relate to a payment of $10. So then you come into the debate, so it's a debate about price is one part, and also about yield. But what's fascinating as you look forward into rising carbon prices, because the carbon price will continue to increase until we get those solutions that we need. But as carbon increases, kilograms of carbon sequestered in farms start to matter. So that's kilograms of carbon converted into carbon dioxide start to have a material impact. Challenges then, of course, on the measurement and the scale, but then there is a digital pathway to unlock it. So then as price increases, it becomes more and more compelling to understand everything about soils. So we're hugely bullish about that potential from a mitigation perspective. And then as a backstop, from an adaptation perspective, we need to understand everything we can about soils, right down to the deep layers, so the full meter down, and everything about the soil biome and how that can build better overall production systems.
So I think when people are considering pricing soils, the finance for soil carbon and building these into business models, we shouldn't be thinking in the necessarily the voluntary market, sort of $20, sub $20 market. We really should start to think about the potential for Article 6, the potential for bigger players to start investing at scale, such as we've seen in Alberta, in California, and indeed in the Australian system.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Thank you, Matthew, for bringing also that connectivity between carbon and nutrition. And I'd like to turn to Gunhild to tell us a little bit more about what the EAT Foundation has been doing in this space and where you see the EAT Foundation playing a lead role going forward in this food systems agenda.
Thank you so much, Matt. And well, to start with, EAT Foundation is all about generating new knowledge around food systems and translating that knowledge into action by working in partnerships with businesses like Nestle, with policymakers, governments, cities, with investors, with civil society organizations that can really translate knowledge into action on the ground. And I think what is important to reflect upon when we are here at COP27 is that we will fail big time, not only on climate, but on the Sustainable Development Goals, unless we are able to take a true holistic food systems approach. We know now that for climate, it's all about energy transition and food system transformation. And if we keep talking about climate smart agriculture or nutrition or food security in silos, we will fail on both. And the Eat Lancet Commission, which was actually the answer to the question that led me and Johan Rockström to start Eat Foundation in 2013, Eat Lancet Commission showed for the first time that food, health, and environmental sustainability, and now we can add resilience, it's like the three musketeers. It's one for all and all for one, and we cannot pick and choose. And we know that food systems have to go from being responsible for 1/3 of the emissions as per today to become massive net carbon sinks by 2050 and onwards. This is something that is in all IPCC's models on getting down to 1.5. Yet no country has a plan for how to do this. And if we add that food systems, in addition to transit from emitter to massive carbon sink, we need to produce more food for 2 billion more people on the same area on land, because we need to spare half the earth, and that food has to be about quality and nutritious, safe food, opposite to today. And as we also know that food systems are the most or first and hardest affected by climate change, this transition or transformation we are talking about is truly unprecedented, anything that we have seen previously. So the solutions to this, and what EAT is working as a catalyst through our partners, and I forgot to say that we are working very closely with philanthropy as well, like Sara and the Rockefeller Foundation, but it's really about holistic food system strategies for any constituency. Governments have to do it, cities have to do it, philanthropy has to do it, private sector, investors, farmers need to take a true systems approach in their approaches, but it's really about changing the system and moving from silos to integrated holistic strategies based on science and science-based targets. And then we need to add the true cost and true value of food. So policies, business strategies, investment plans really reflect the true value and true cost of food. And I will end with, Matthew, that we launched the first Eat Lancet Commission report in 2019, which was a landmark report and really catalyzed a lot of action and new science. And since the IPCC or the UN don't have a mechanism to offer at the moment for us to build consensus on where we are heading, we are now setting up Eat Lancet, the second iteration, 2.0, as the de facto IPCC for food. We are doing that strictly scientific, strictly independent, with the best scientific groups and universities around the world, and the first ever food intercomparison model, so really applying IPCC modeling to strengthen the models, make that more rigorous, including social equity for the first time, a much stronger focus on national translation, what planetary health diets will look like in different parts of the world, and then obviously closing new knowledge gaps, including trying to shed light on what does regenerative mean in terms of an outcome-based definition. So this very ambitious commission and project will do extensive consultations to really listen to actors on the ground that are facing the challenges, including how farmers are seeing this. Farmers' knowledge is also knowledge. We shouldn't forget that. The report will be out in end of 2024 or early 2025, and we are now building with all our partners and massive initiatives towards COP28 and beyond, coalitions that are ready to take the targets into action. So happy to say a few more words about that afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, sir.
Do you want this, Matt?
Thank you so much, Gunhild. And our CEO, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, is on the advisory group for the EAT Foundation. So we're absolutely delighted about that. And I should have also mentioned our relationship with the Rockefeller Foundation, our ongoing relationship with biodiversity. And thank you, Gunhild, for this musketeers approach. They're all for one and one for all. I think I'll certainly be taking that away. But we need to act urgently. So these things, yes, we can wait for reports, which are very important, but we need to take action now. So I'm going to do a little bit of a quick fire. So what are the things that you're doing now as a matter of urgency, and what's on the sort of short-term horizon? Sarah, if we could start with you.
Yeah, well, let's start with data. And, Matthew gave such a beautiful portrayal of where we are with soil data. We need to take not only soil data, but these other layers of regenerative biodiversity data, water data, yield, productivity. We need interoperability between data sets, and we need to synthesize these data sets and downscale them so decision makers, namely farmers and investors and business and community leaders, can make better decisions. Rockefeller has a few specific interventions in this space. One of those, in light of the food crisis, has been a food security tracker, a data tracker we developed with Grow Intelligence that puts together real-time yield, crop stock data, drought conditions, weather monitoring. But imagine what that could be when you bring in soil, biodiversity, and these other dimensions of regenerative. It's possible, it's so desirable, but we really need a globally coordinated effort to get there. That's one. I think the second, where are we going? And we're all using this term regenerative, but we really do need a space to build consensus around what this means, what we are measuring, because it's not helpful for large company X versus large company Y versus farmer organization A, B, and C to measure this slightly differently. It fragments the investment. Frankly, it builds a sense of fear that, are we really talking about what I mean or what you mean? So we need to build trust, and we need to take the time to actually establish these definitions. I'm really delighted and eager to invite anyone listening and here in the audience to join a global network of networks that's been stood up called Regen 10 that we're investing in along with IKEA Foundation, others, to create that space. So to build consensus around outcomes frameworks, to connect landscapes that are practicing regenerative, and hopefully to unlock the large-scale regen transition financing that's needed so we get the risk off the back of farmers, which is where it's currently sitting. Gunhild mentioned TCA. I think TCA is another ready off-the-shelf methodology. It's basically cost-benefit 2.0. But lets us see what are those externalities from our food choices that live in terms of environmental cost, biodiversity cost, health costs. We did a huge TCA study on the United States. we're getting calls from policymakers at state level saying, my gosh, this helps us make an argument for good food procurement and other intervention areas that we've really struggled to make across ministries or departments. So super powerful. The last one I'll just put on the table is alternative protein. We're super bullish about black soldier fly in particular. We see just huge potential to basically go insects to feed. How do we take insects, feed them to fish and others? And then with insects, you also get this beautiful fertilizer called frass that not only is incredibly nutritious for plants, and we're looking at productivity increases from utilization of frass that is really astounding. Some studies we funded just coming together in the last month or so, but it also is an organopesticide. So we're seeing nematode reduction and other plant diseases dramatically increase just from the use of frass. No other synthetic pesticides. So really interesting. I'll stop there.
That's terrific. Thanks so much for sharing those insights. Wonderful. And of course, from the Nestle perspective, what are you doing now that's plug and play, and what's on the horizon for Nestle when it comes to food systems? Thanks, Owen.
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned before short-term targets and objectives, and we have a very ambitious and difficult to achieve pathway of getting to 20% regenerative ingredients by 2025 and 50% by 2030. So while I do agree that it's important to have global alignment and understanding around regenerative, we also need to kind of measure that against the tension of needing to move quickly. And we're doing that in terms of building on long-established relationships. So we've worked with cocoa farmers for several decades on improving agricultural production techniques. And now we're looking at how do we tailor that towards carbon, towards biodiversity, towards water even more, and not just being about yield and security of supply. So there's an evolution, if you like, in long-established relationships, in coffee, in cocoa. I think there's crop-specific work going on through platforms like Sci platform, which is a bit more technically focused. So what does that mean in a certain supply chain? There's coalition building as well that we're doing. There's the policy work. But I think my key message would be we have to move quickly and build a movement at the same time, which helps deliver scale over the longer term and greater alignment. So kind of managing that tension, I think, would be the key priority for us going forwards, and making sure that we share what we're doing better. I think we're not as good as we should be at that. It's really telling the story from the farmer perspective, what works on the ground, how we're creating peer-to-peer networks and people that feel like they own and are bought into the process from the beginning, rather than, it's not Nestle going out and saying, you must do X, Y, and Z. It's providing the space and sometimes the funding, the technical expertise, etc., to help make that happen at the farm level, establishing reference farms, examples in different countries, which can then be shared and hopefully scaled up. So that's kind of where we're at, and these short-term targets are really a key focus area for the company.
Thanks very much, Owen. And I think, Matthew, we know your experience in Australian context. What about in the global context, perhaps, and where do you see things moving in terms of using carbon markets to get these fantastic outcomes that you've referenced previously?
Yeah. So great question. I think globally, it becomes about the integrity of the carbon credit that's been issued from a regenerative farm project. So that's the reliability. And I don't think you can have a conversation about integrity without fitting in 1.5 degrees Celsius, which I think is the point in terms of speed and scale. So we need to get speed and scale. And for us, that is then all about digitizing soil carbon, so it's a soil carbon sequestration as a service. So for us, we've just set up a subsidiary in the States. So we're doing some pilot work in the States. We're scouting across other jurisdictions. We had a great session here at the IETA Pavilion on Wednesday with a bunch of other soil carbon project developers. So we're getting together to collectivize, to start to promote soils and these issues around the science of soils, the permanence of soils, the integrity of soils. So unfortunately, there's a lot of submission writing. Who knew saving the planet had so much bureaucracy involved? One thing that's on our horizon that we're really going to be galvanized to act is to ensure that greenhouse gas reporting protocols look at land removals properly and don't disadvantage or prevent those solutions from being part of the mix. So there is some concerning aspects in terms of reporting frameworks that have come from highly industrially based systems of accounting and reporting being then applied to land and to nature in a way that discriminates against that as a solution. So we're looking very closely at that, and then trying to galvanize the coalition of the willing to ensure that we do look at the risks, we do look at the evidence, but we don't preclude soils and agriculture from being a really big part, a really fast scaling part of the solution. And for us, in terms of achieving that, it is through digitizing. And so we're about to launch our prototype soil sampling rig, which is already hardwired in to do near infrared spectroscopy. So scanning all of our soil samples. And why we do that is not only to measure the carbon, but for those who know, near infrared spectroscopy has the potential to take essentially the digital fingerprint of the soil and be able to measure multiple analytes. So not just carbon, but potassium, magnesium, calcium, all the sub-analytes, or the macronutrients, pH, etc. So that you can start to pull apart causality, management action leading to landscape outcome. And importantly, once you've scanned it, you can go back in time to re-look at, well, was it the magnesium calcium relationship? And where we're getting super excited is about like all the buzzwords of machine learning, artificial intelligence. But with that approach to data collection, you can almost retrospectively run hypotheses on what happened 5, 10, 15 years ago if you're laying that digital footprint down. So a really big push on enabling scale, proving causality, and in doing that, we actually get the top grade verification because you've got the fundamental science behind you. So with the fundamental science, you can write the report pretty much to any standard because you're basically looking at those outcomes as to what has physically been measured and applying that to monetize whatever benefits. So that's where we're looking internationally.
That's absolutely terrific, Matthew, and I think my mic's on again.
Got one here.
No, I think I'm back on. That's great. Well, look, I mean, we've looked at the new and emerging opportunities, the interesting data, and this is a very strong point that's coming through, the data and technology that's needed to make the transition, that's needed to fund in innovative ways these types of changes. But perhaps we can talk a little bit about policy, Gunhild. I mean, you mentioned in your introduction that we don't have national pathways for diets, and so what are the critical changes required in national policies? What might even be a UNFCCC, a treaty type policy that we could see that would help in the enabling environment to bring these things to life?
Thank you so much, Matt. Great question. As a result of the work we did during the UN Food Systems Summit, 117 countries have now started developing national pathways for sustainable, healthy, resilient, regenerative food systems. But as per now, these are just nice words on a paper. They are not implemented. There is no science base at the national level to do that. And they are not legally binding. And obviously, food systems must be fully integrated into countries' NDCs and their NAPs. And the food systems policy must be across different ministries. So the food systems approach is absolutely essential. But then the question is, why aren't these pathways just implemented? And Jean-Claude Juncker of the EU Commission, when he was in that role, said very well that policymakers basically all know what to do. That about climate change, but the same goes for food. We all know what to do, just not how to get re-elected once we have done it. And business would say that we know what to do, but we don't know how to make a profit doing it because there is a system failure and there are so many deadlocks and there are also so many vested interests. So what we as EAT are working on now, together with our friends and allies and partners, is really three levels, actually. We need to get national governments to commit and by COP28, because we are running out of time and the transformation has to get well underway within this decade. So there is literally no time to lose, and we should start tomorrow by mobilizing towards COP28. But it's really about getting heads of states to commit to developing fully holistic integrated food system strategies integrated into NDCs, NAPs, etc., and announcing that from COP28. But for national government to do that, they need support. They need political support. Obviously, the movement building and getting bottom-up pressure is also essential. So aligning this with campaigning and really getting people to demand change is important. But then we are doubling down on cities as a result of the work we did during the UN Food System Summit to empower cities to become centers of demand generation, and we will work with Region 10, this regenerative landscape initiative, other landscape initiatives, to really connect consumption and demand in urban areas with farmers and regenerative landscapes in the rural areas. And one of the things we do know by now is that more resilience means more local supply chains, more local production for local consumption. And by helping cities that are already committing to move forward on food systems, but helping them actually implementing them and operationalizing true value of food, true cost of food, and changing public procurement, etc., by doing so, we will also enable national governments to actually be able to do this. So national governments committing, cities committing, private sector. I hope Nestlé will be one of the forward-leaning companies that say from now and towards 2030 we will start working on this food system strategy, and we will help each other because we need amplification across sectors, and obviously the groundswell with people supporting, providing the political support and demand for industry. So there are several initiatives now at work trying to create more alignments and rallying behind a few champion countries where we would then empower all layers of the cake, so to say. And then the second point we are working on is to get a financing mechanism to be kicked off by COP28, which for now is called a co-investment platform. GEF is heavily involved, Green Climate Fund is heavily involved, the bank, World Economic Forum, other big financing institutions, but there is nowhere to go for governments, cities, farmers, actors on the ground that want to be part of the transformation journey, and that mechanism has to get in place. So right now there's a process to crystallize what is needed on top of what we already have, and how can we channel a major chunk of the 130 trillion that was committed at COP26 to net zero, but to net positive food systems for health and for nature and prosperity. So we'll count on you to be supportive and involved, and look forward to do this together.
Thank you, Gunhild, and you can certainly count on the GEF to be a supporter of these initiatives as well. And our colleagues here from the Cities program, we have Jeff Griffin, FAO here, who's going to be working with us on leading our food systems program into the GEF 8. So I'm looking forward to taking this discussion forward. Now, we're joined by Sean de Cleene, who is the head of food systems at the World Economic Forum. Sean, you've been involved in so many of these discussions, through so many COPs, through food systems summits, through your work at the WEF and the flagships programs and Food Action Alliance. Can you leave us with some thoughts about what we should be doing and thinking about leaving this COP27 and preparing for COP28?
No small challenge. Easy. But what's exciting is we are here today. I have to say, we're here today on Saturday, crowded into to the COP Pavilion on the first time there's been a food day at COP. I mean, for many of us, I've been attending COP since 2008. I think I go back to when And so this is exciting. The fact that we're even here having this conversation where there was a, where there was a leaders summit on Monday where like more than 20 heads of state came together with CEOs and heads of international organizations, made some really bold commitments, towards, in the sort of like in the billions and, aiming for the trillions around what can be done. And the fact that we've got this World Food Day is exciting. The challenge is, though, yes, I mean, I'm listening today, systems thinking came out. We're talking about transforming food systems. Incredibly important. I can't state that more. I mean, we are in the midst of, a food crisis. This is going to be, in many ways, all-consuming. We're going to shift from sort of like tens of millions to hundreds of millions of people being at the absolute brink of food insecurity. So we've got to deal with food security in a very clear way, look at resilience in those systems, but we have to take a systems approach. We can't just deal with producing more food as cheaply as possible to get as many people as possible. It will not work. It will not so we have to take a systems approach. And so for those of you who are actually involved in the important part of what we're here for at COP, which is the negotiations, I can't stress this anymore. I mean, if we're going to begin now, this would be to have the concept of resilient food systems, even if it's just those words. We can bring in sustainable and nutritious and inclusive and all that, but even if we just had food systems in the outcome document, not just food security, but food systems in the outcome document, I cannot stress how much of a game changer that would be if that happens. That will allow us to build towards COP28. The incoming presidency for COP28 have already said that they will put food central to the discussion at COP28. But we need to give it that momentum now. I think the other thing that's come out today is what we're seeing is a really powerful sort of thinking around moving from beyond just traditional thinking on partnerships and sort of proof of concept models to real strategic alignment towards common objectives. And so, it's represented. I mean, Gunhild is sort of, is one of the people who's been right at the center of this kind of thinking. How do you bring, and you articulated it very well, how do you bring major platforms that are focused on cities together with major platforms that are focused on agricultural transformation and rural areas, together with major platforms that are focused on energy transition, if you're looking at things like solar power and that, together towards a common objective, working in a sort of platform of platforms modality rather than a myriad of sort of individual disconnected partnerships, which is not going to get us to where we need to get to. So we need to transform the way we think to really create a networked, platformed, aligned, outcome-driven approach. I think the third thing for me that's coming through very powerfully is around innovation. We need to take a much more holistic view of innovation. I mean, you hear it coming through the whole panel today. We need innovation in the way that we think about data. We need to put data and that right at the center. We need to be able to make much smarter decisions if we're going to move towards things like unleashing soil carbon. I mean, soil carbon could literally buy the planet time. It's the solution at the moment that could get us there, but on its own, it's not a silver bullet. We have to take a much broader, innovative approach. And as we said, we need to think of innovative ways to put farmers at the center. We need innovative policy approaches. We need innovative business models that will shift. We need really critical innovation in the way that we actually build trust. At the end of the day, innovation will move at the speed of trust. And so if we want to achieve the scale and the sort of speed that we want to do, we have to build that trust in from the beginning. And so we've got to create that very dynamic reframing of the way we think about innovation. And so I'll just leave you with some of those thoughts, but I will come back to that final piece that I was saying. We are here at COP. This is a negotiation process. We do need to put food systems at the heart of this week while we can, to really give us the momentum over the next 12 months to build from that and create something powerful while we're in the midst of this incredibly challenging sort of energy, food, finance crisis. And the finance piece is the piece I will leave you with, is we need that will require a huge rethink in the way that we look at finance, blended finance, the sort of, the sort of thinking that Gunhild's talking about, what we need to do there and how we think about, because there is a huge bridging need to get from the current reality to where we need to be, and how to bring that down short term wise, and how to build that financing mechanism to allow us to do that.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was a wonderful, powerful, punchy statement there at the end to motivate us on this Food Systems Day at the COP. And what I really liked was your point on collaboration, because that drew a nice circle back to Sarah's opening comment, which is really we need this enhanced forms of collaboration, these teams of teams, these platforms of platforms. And I think the types of initiatives that we heard today exemplify that approach. Following this discussion, we will have the launch of one of GEF's major investments in Brazil, which is called the Vertentes project. So if you are interested in how these approaches are coming to life, including such things as building resilience and soil carbon, engaging the farming community, please stick around for that. We have time for a question. We have a question, please. Yes, please. Please, if you could state who you are, because I think people in the live stream would want to know who you are, and to whom you would like your question directed.
Hi, I'm Richard Zaltzman. I'm with EIT Food. We're a European agency granting in the food sector. Sarah, you dropped an amazing statistic, which was 2.5 billion smallholder farmers. When you collectively talk about speed and scale, and Owen, I guess this is something for you as well, how do you combine speed and scale with the hyper-local element of every individual farm is its own biome, is its own conditions, its own crops and farming practices?
It raises a tremendous tension that I think we live with within food systems transformation. And yet, what we know is that the past of food systems transformation, which has yielded such consolidation, corporate consolidation, it's fewer than half a dozen companies that own most of the seeds, most of the fertilizer, most of the inputs, right? We're losing smallholder farms, we're losing small farms in the United States as we are globally. And that is not yielding diets that are healthy, nor production practices that are regenerative. So on the one hand, yes, it's fragmented. Yes, it's hyper diverse. But I think what we're trying to figure out is, how do you harness that diversity for resilience? The other kind of piece to the answer I would give is that when we look at the data story in terms of, I think these bits of speculation about could agroecological practices feed a global population of 9 billion? Do we actually have the evidence? I think one of the things we do know is, again, the evidence we have about the current industrialized practices is that system cannot. And when we actually look at the literature, I've been trying to look at meta-analyses of regenerative and agroecological practices. There are few. I mean, relatively, we have so much less codified, peer-reviewed science, meaning I think what's there is really promising, but we need to throw more money, more attention, more prioritization at answering some of these questions. So it's not about getting rid of smallholder farming, not at all. It is about bringing more resources, more light, more research, more partnership to those practicing it.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to that with a kind of practical example. So, well, first of all, at kind of high level, there is a temptation to focus on larger producers, because 80% of your carbon footprint probably comes from a relatively small number of companies who are then supplying into Nestle and represent probably quite large land users, right? So we need to kind of manage that tension again and say, okay, we need to focus on them because they're going to deliver the numbers, in terms of carbon reduction, which is critically important. But we also have to respect and engage the diversity of the supply chain. And what we've done is consistently not gone down the route of further consolidation in the search of a short-term sustainability goal. So on palm oil, for example, we could probably reach 100% verified deforestation free right now if we kicked out a load of smallholder farmers from the supply chain. But that's not what we want to do. We want to figure out what local solutions work for them instead of further consolidating. And so the number you see is going to be more like in the mid to high 90s rather than strictly 100%. Because the verification piece for the really small smallholder sector is much more challenging. And so that requires really the hard work on the ground, accompanied by things like satellite monitoring, data gathering, etc. So I think it's giving some leeway, I think, in the food system for both to contribute, both to act, but to understand that it might happen at a different pace and in a different way.
Well, I'd like to conclude on that comment, and I'd like for us to show our appreciation for all of our panelists today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and really setting the scene for what's going to be a great day.
Sean for president.
Thank you so much.